A very warm welcome to all my students and viewers. This is the Bishop's Heritage School, Patna, and this is assignment number 4 for class 8. The subject is literature in English, and we will be doing the prose A Face in the Dark by Ruskin Bond. Now, before we begin the story A Face in the Dark, let me give you an introduction to the author, Ruskin Bond. Ruskin Bond was born on 19th May 1934 in a military hospital to Edith Clark and Aubrey Bond in Kasauli. His father was with the Royal Air Force RAF from 1939 till 1944. Bond spent his early childhood in Jamnagar, Gujarat and Shimla. At the age of 10, Ruskin went to live at his grandmother's house in Dehradun after his father's death that year from jaundice. He was raised by his mother and stepfather. He did his schooling from Bishop Cotton School in Shimla, from where he graduated in 1950 after winning several writing competitions in the school, including the Avon Divinity Prize and the Haley Literature Prize. Following his school education, he went to his aunt's house in Channel Islands in the UK. He worked for a few years freelancing from Delhi and Dehradun. He sustained himself financially by writing short stories and poems for newspapers and magazines. In the 1980s, Penguin set up in India and approached him for writing a few books. He had written Vagrants in the Valley in 1956 as a sequel to The Room on the Roof. These two novels were published in one volume by Penguin India in 1993. The following year, a collection of his non-fiction writings, The Best of Ruskin Bond, was published by Penguin India. His interest in supernatural fiction led him to write popular titles such as Ghost Stories from the Raj, A Season of Ghosts, and A Face in the Dark and Other Hauntings. Since then, he has written over 500 short stories, essays, and novels, including The Blue Umbrella, Funny Side Up, A Flight of Pigeons, and more than 50 books for children. He has also published 2 volumes of autobiography. Scenes from a Writer's Life describes his formative years growing up in Anglo-India. The Lamp is Lit is a collection of essays and episodes from his journal. Since 1963, he has lived as a freelance writer in Mussoorie, a town in the Himalayan foothills in Uttarakhand, and lives with his adopted family in Landore, Mussoorie's Ivy Cottage, which has been his house since 1980. He got the Sahitya Academy Award in 1992 for Our Trees Still Grow in Dehra for his published work in English. He was awarded the Padma Shri in 1999 and Padma Bhushan in 2014. The short story A Face in the Dark takes the reader into the realm of the supernatural horror. Mr. Oliver, the Anglo-Indian teacher in a school on the outskirts of Shimla, was returning home alone on a dark night through a pine forest, and he had a brush with the supernatural twice, one immediately following the other. First he comes across a young boy, weeping silently, who was found to be faceless on closer inspection. Next, the watchman also happened to be faceless like the boy. Both these encounters rouse our curiosity regarding the supernatural. That is, whether it exists or not, whether ghosts are there or not, or is it just a figment of our nervous state of mind which makes us imagine things. On a deeper level, it can imply that our love and curiosity about the supernatural makes us an easy prey to mysterious occurrences. Our interest is also greatly aroused by anything that is unnatural or inexplicable. The aliens excite us, the extraterrestrial beings excite us, thought of life on Mars fires our minds. Hence it is only natural that the unnatural experiences of Mr. Oliver would also give us goosebumps. This is exactly what the author has successfully achieved through the experiences of a teacher who was not a nervous man by disposition. So let's begin the story of Face in the Dark by Ruskin Bond. The story begins like this. Mr. Oliver, an Anglo-Indian teacher. Now, who's an Anglo-Indian? I'm an Anglo-Indian myself. An Anglo-Indian is identified as a person whose father is or ancestors were of European descent, but who's a native of India. So Mr. Oliver was an Anglo-Indian teacher, was returning to his school late one night on the outskirts, means outer regions, of the hill station of Shimla. From before Kipling's time, Kipling means Rudyard Kipling, a famous English author, the school had been run on English public school lines. The school was running as an school from England. It was a proper English medium school. And the boys, most of them from wealthy Indian families, wore blazers, coats, caps and ties. Life magazine, a very famous magazine, did a feature on India once and had once compared the school to the Eton of the East. It was known as the Eton of the East because it was compared to the famous Eton School and College from England. Mr. Oliver had been teaching in the school for several years. The Simla Bazaar, with its cinemas and restaurants, was about 3 miles from the school, and Mr. Oliver, a bachelor, he was unmarried, usually used to go for brief walks, slow walks around the town in the evening. Returning after dark, when he would take a shortcut through the pine forest. The pine forest is a perfect setting for supernatural element. the horrifying element of horror. When there was a strong wind, the pine trees made eerie sounds. Eerie means scary sounds to make, in horror movies you come across protagonist walking through the forest and suddenly a sound comes. Like that. An eerie sound that kept most people to the main road. But Mr. Oliver was not a nervous or imaginative man. He didn't have any kind of wild imaginations about ghosts and all. He was not a kind of coward. He was not a man who could have got scared very easily. He was not a darpok, as you call in Hindi, as you say in Hindi. He carried a torchlight, and its gleam, the batteries were running down. The torchlight was flickering. The batteries were running down. Moved fitfully down the narrow forest path. When its flickering light, the flickering light of the torch fell on the figure of a boy who was sitting alone on a rock. The boy was sitting alone on a rock. Mr. Oliver stopped. Boys were not supposed to be out after dark. The boys from my schools are not supposed to be in the forest sitting on a rock so late in the evening. What are you doing out here, boy? He asked Mr. Oliver sharply, moving closer so that he could recognize the miscreant. Miscreant means a mischievous person, someone who does mischief. But even as he approached the boy, Mr. Oliver sensed that something was wrong. Something was wrong. Something was not right. The boy appeared to be crying. The boy was crying like this. His head hung down. He held his face in his hands and his body shook convulsively. His body was shaking. It was a strange, soundless weeping, and Mr. Oliver felt distinctly uneasy. Something is wrong. He was not feeling comfortable. The boy was crying. Pine forest, darkness, oh God. That's very scary, isn't it? Well, what's the matter, he asked, his anger giving way to concern. Initially he was angry that why one of his students was sitting on a rock in the forest so late in the evening, but then he was concerned about the boy because he found the boy to be crying. What are you crying for? Why are you crying? The boy would not answer or look up. His body continued to be racked with silent sobbing. He was going on crying. He was going on crying like this. Come on, boy, you shouldn't be out here at this hour. What are you doing here at this weird hour late in the evening? You shouldn't be in the forest. Tell me the trouble. Are you in trouble? Look up. Show me your face. The boy looked up. He took his hands from his face and looked up at his teacher. The light from Mr. Oliver's torch fell on the boy's face. The light fell on the boy's face so that Mr. Oliver could see his face clearly now. If you could call it a face, the author is saying. The face was so strange. If you can call it a face at all, then it was a face. But it wasn't a face at all. It had no eyes, no ears, nose or mouth. It was just a round, smooth head with a school cap on top of it. And that's where the story should end. That's where the story should end. The ghost should have killed Mr. Oliver. The story should have come to an end. But no, that was not the case. But for Mr. Oliver, the author is saying it did not end here. The torch fell from his trembling hand. His hands were trembling. The torch fell down. He turned and scrambled down the path. He started running. He was struggling, running blindly through the trees and calling for help. Help, help, bachao, bachao, he was saying. He was still running towards the school buildings when he saw a lantern, a night lamp swinging in the middle of the path. Means someone was holding the lamp. Mr. Oliver stumbled up to the watchman. He was just about to fall down, gasping for breath. He was struggling. He was breathing heavily. What is it, Sahib? Asked the watchman. Has there been an accident? Why are you running? Something happened to you? Sir, why are you running, Sahib? I saw something horrible. A boy weeping in the forest, Mr. Oliver replied. And he had no face. No face, Sahib? The watchman replied, counter-questioned actually. No face, Sahib? No eyes, no nose, mouth, nothing, Mr. Oliver replied. Do you mean it was like this, Sahib? Asked the watchman and raised the lamp to his own face. The watchman had no eyes, no ears, no features at all. He was a ghost himself. So Mr. Oliver escaped from one ghost to fall into the trap of another one. Oh God, what a horrifying night for him. Not even an eyebrow. And that's when the wind blew the lamp out. The lamp goes off. What happens to Mr. Oliver is left to our imagination. Maybe he died. Maybe he escaped. We never know. And that is the best mysterious element of the story. A face in the dark immediately conjures to our mind images of the supernatural haunting as we can come across in the darkness. The story here takes us through an eerie experience through the nerve-wracking encounter of the supernatural boy. Mr. Oliver was a teacher. While returning home, he came across the boy and then escaped from him only to fall into the clutches of that another horrifying ghost, the watchman. Perhaps the darkness hides mysteries and fears which disappear when properly analyzed in the light. The title is a very appropriate one, A Face in the Dark.